To me, the future of work is hybrid, it is digital, it's inclusive. Now is not the time to slow down, now is the time to amp it up.
The big change here is the empowerment to choose those opportunities, to be in control of where you work, how you work, and when you work.
People are creating much more flexible ways of working.
And there is technology that enables us to do that in a pretty seamless way.
Together, let's create the future of work.
Well, good afternoon and welcome everyone to the fourth session in the G100 PwC Digitising Finance series. I'm Martin Roberts. I'm the Group Chief Financial Officer for Ramsay Healthcare, and I'm also the Deputy Chair of the Group of 100, Australia's peak body for CFOs and senior finance executives. So far in the series, we've covered digitisation, finance function transformation, and then in the last one, we discussed emerging skills and upskilling. In today's session, we focused on the future of work for the finance profession, a nice lead on from the previous session. For those of you who've missed any of the previous sessions, the working group will prepare a highlights video of all the sessions to date. This will be available shortly after this session. If COVID-19 has taught us anything, it's that finance teams have adapted quickly to remote working and shown resilience through this period of rapid change. Traditional ways of working have changed forever, and finance functions need to rethink their future workforce. I'm really looking forward to today's session, and I'm sure we'll hear some really interesting perspectives from our panel members. Before we start, I'd like to open with an acknowledgement of country. We acknowledge and pay our respects to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island peoples as the first peoples of Australia, whose ancestral lands and waters we work and live on throughout Australia. We honour the wisdom of and pay respect to elders past, present and future. I'm pleased to introduce you to our host for today's webinar, Sam Lobley. Sam is the National Leader of the PwC Australia CFO Advisory Practice and Head of the Group of 100 Future of the Profession Working Group. Over to you, Sam.
Thanks, Martin, for the introduction and welcome everyone. As you saw in the opening video, we've just seen some really interesting perspectives on the future of work. And as Martin mentioned, the COVID pandemic has taught us many things, and one of which is the need to focus on all of the people in our teams and their own individual needs, but also it's forced businesses to adapt to new ways of working, including careful consideration into how, when and where we work. As we're all aware, it requires not only the right technologies and tools to be in place, but also the right leadership skills to support everyone in the organisation through this challenging and difficult period. So, welcome back to the Future of the Profession series. We've had a relatively short hiatus as we work through winter. And for those of you who were with us at previous sessions, you'll recall that we heard from a range of speakers from across the G100 who covered topics such as digitisation, finance function transformation, and really interesting last session on emerging skills gaps and reskilling. So today's the fourth topic in our webinar series. And as Martin mentioned, we're going to dig deeper into the future of work, what this means for finance functions, the broader finance community, and our organisations as a whole. We're going to hear about how COVID has changed our ways of working forever, some for positive changes and some more challenging ones. And we're also going to explore how different businesses have chosen how best to adapt to suit the needs of their organisation and their workforce. So as always, we've got a really interesting mix of presenters and who bring a diverse range of perspectives. We're going to hear from Lawrence Goldstone, who's the PwC partner who leads our Future of Work activity. And then also Kate Koch, who's the CFO at SEEK, and Rich Walker, who's the General Manager of Finance at Koch. Lawrence will bring his own insights into hybrid working and how we at PwC think we need to plan for the future in this space. While Kate and Rich will also bring their own unique perspectives around this space and how it's developing at both SEEK and Koch. As consistent with previous sessions, we'll then flip to a Q&A panel. And so throughout the whole session, please feel free to log questions into the text box. I think it's at the left-hand corner of your screen. And if there's a specific panelist that you want to tag the question to, then please put their name in the question as well. So with that, I'd like to introduce our first speaker today, So Lawrence Goldstone, who I mentioned, is a partner here at PwC, and he leads our Future of Work initiative. I think, Lawrence, you've been a partner for over 25 years and bring a lot of passion to this topic, especially around different disruptive models of change and bringing new perspectives to executives and boards around this topic and others. Lawrence co-founded and led the boutique consultancy The Difference, which is now part of PwC. And he's an expert in problem solving, employee engagement and communications. Outside of his work with PwC, Lawrence chairs the board at Oz Harvest, which many of you will know is Australia's largest food rescue organisation. He also sits on the board of For Purpose Company and other startups. Lawrence is based in Sydney with his wife and 2 children, and like me, I noticed, is a self-confessed lifelong obsessive about Liverpool Football Club. So I'm sure he spends lots of hours in the middle of the night watching English and European football. Thanks, Lawrence, over to you.
Thanks, Sam. I absolutely do. And it's one of those passions that goes across the globe. So thank you for that intro. As Sam said, I'm the future lead partner here at PwC Australia. And so I'm delighted to be able to share some of the perspectives that we've been putting out into market, as well as some of the things that we're doing ourselves here at PwC. Before I start, we know that the landscape has been changing massively, especially accelerated over the last 18 months when it comes to future work. And scarily, as fast as we're approaching change now, this is also likely to be the slowest that we'll experience change for the rest of our lives. There are already 5 generations working side by side in the workforce, with around 50% of the workforce being millennials. Emerging generations are forecast to have 17 jobs over 5 careers in their lifetime, and flexible work looks likely to become the norm, with part-time roles set to increase year on year all the way through to 2030 and beyond. Remote work's probably been the biggest change that we've all experienced, certainly over the last 18 months. You know, we've surveyed to death, but we know that roughly sort of 4 in 5 people who can work remotely say they want a mix of in-person and remote working, with less than 10% of workers wanting to return to an office full-time and only around 16% wanting to work remote full-time. So quite clearly, the future is hybrid. And it's about finding that mix of where, when, and how different groups work. I thought today, rather than go through a series of data and slides that you may have already seen, I'd focus on 5 key bets or considerations when thinking about the future work. But before I do, I thought I'd quickly define it. And if we can move the slide on, define how we think about future work as a topic. And so there are 4 parts for us when we think about future work. That's work type, workforce, workplaces and spaces, and the experience of work. And as you can see from the model in front of you, it's around the kind of work we do. It's around the skills and capabilities that we have and that we need to undertake that work. It's about the physical and digital places in which we utilize to be able to perform work. And that's not anymore just home and office, but also a real increase in third spaces. And it's about the experience of work. So it's the glue that ties all of this together around how we inspire, connect our cultural well-being and communities that allow us to do the work that we need to do. And no one part is driven in isolation. It's very much around the interactivity of all of these different component parts. It is complex, but it doesn't need to be complicated. If we go to the next page, we've been talking in market recently around 3 horizons and this need to think and plan for the longer term, not just for the immediate response that we find ourselves in. We we released a piece of thought leadership earlier this year called Changing Places that I know several of you got to attend. And we defined those 3 phases as rebuild, redefine, and reimagine. In many ways, we've been anchored in Horizon 1 thinking for some time, and I'm a little bit concerned that we're actually maybe even gone back to Horizon 2. Horizon 1 thinking was very much defined around the return to office, and it's a bit of a risk that the last 3 months have actually set us back to that Horizon 0 planning, whereby we're all back in working from home. But it is important, and we do talk about needing to think about these different horizons in our planning and not just get short-tracked into the short term and immediate sort of thinking. So those that really do invest and start to think across those different horizons and building for the future and that reimagination of what work will look like, not just how do we get back to the office and to our environments, is really key and really important. So as I said, 5 big bets to start exploring. First one we see is skilling as a differentiator in the war for talent. It's clear workers want to reskill. PwC recently did a global study of around 32,500 people titled Hopes and Fears. And the main outcomes of that were people want more digital skills, more inclusivity, more flexibility. About 40% of workers successfully reported that they improved their digital skills through a pandemic. And around 77% believe that they're ready to learn new skills or completely retrain. Interestingly, within that, 4 out of 5 see training as a matter of personal responsibility. So this is the whole question here around skilling, which is where does the onus of responsibility lie? Obviously, it's on both sides, but it's key and clear that workers want to reskill and retrain. With the war of talent increasing, or the war for talent increasing hugely, and a forecast of 1.1 million less people in Australia as a result of the pandemic, skills are going to be really key for the future, and holding on to employees is going to be a critical part of organizations' strategies moving forwards. When we talk about skills, I want to just point out that we're talking about both the technical and human skills. 8 out of the 10 skills for the future as defined by the World Economic Forum are soft skills or human skills as they've been defined. At the point there around PwC research with the WEF actually found that closing the skills gap in Australia had the opportunity to create 200,000 new roles, which actually would provide about 5.2% GDP uplift. Examples of organizations playing into that big bet skills for the future, which I would term as Horizon 3 type thinking. Woolworths is a great example of this, made a big statement with their announcement around a 50 mil future work fund around promoting reskilling to all workers. PwC ourselves announced a 3 billion global investment in technical skills, and more recently a 15 mil investment in soft skills for all of our people at our sort of junior, younger levels around building those sort of core skills for the future. Second big bet, it really centers around the office. I've titled it, "The Office is Dead, Long Live the Office." It basically sort of says to us, we need to rethink what the purpose of the office is into the future. A different model is needed. There's a term that's doing the round at the moment, which is around earning the commute. How do we earn the commute to make it purposeful and responsible for people who need to come in to an office? And I am focusing this a little bit on that knowledge worker community, not to all sectors of the workforce, but those that do want to come in, how do you earn the commute? And for organizations needing to rethink the purpose, mix, and use around what an office is for. We've surveyed people to death, as I said, over the last 18 months. We know that people want to come in for creative problem solving, for social work, for learning, to create a sense of purpose and culture, but they want to do administration and loan tasks and solo work in quiet spaces. And often that is going to be at home or in a third space. So it's going to be required for us to start to think of the office with different models. Models like a clubhouse model will become more and more popular as organizations do need to think about and reimagine workspaces and offer access to flexible alternate spaces. I think the debate and discussion around a number of days, however, a number of days in an office versus home is a moot point and the wrong question. It's around what's the purpose of work? Where do I need to work best with my teams? And I think the whole area of hyper-locality, and that goes to both teams as well, will become really prime in that conversation around where, when, and how people work. The next one to call out is very much around personalizing EVP in a hybrid world. We are in a talent crunch like we've never seen before. I believe EVP needs a real rethink, and that war for talent will be won and lost in many places around the new EVP. Over the past 18 months, the pendulum has swung very much towards the employee. There's a whole premise now around choice. It's not just about flexibility, very much around choice. That seems to be the new language at the moment. That's irrespective of whether you're frontline or office workers. It's very much that language of being in control of choosing benefits. I think for the most part into the knowledge worker economies, if the 9-to-5 model of being in an office is dead, what is that new EVP that really plays out? I think scarily sitting underneath EVP, 2 recent reports that I came across, one from Microsoft on the Work Trend Index, one from Gartner, both predict 40 to 50% of workers, all workers that is, are currently thinking about leaving their jobs. If that is true, there is a huge cliff coming. So that could make 2022 the great resignation. And if that's the case, one of the real levers that we've got to play on right now and to focus in on is going to be around EVP. And I think organizations that don't stare into that are going to be the ones that are left behind. Into the next big bet around diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's business critical. I think we need to really be reflecting this, not just in gender or cultural diversity, but in thinking diversity and representational diversity. As I said, 5 generations working across the workforce at the same time. Decisions for our future, we need to ensure the right diversity of voices at the table. Seeing a lot of what we'd call people councils or sub-boards starting to appear in organizations. We at PwC have built a people council that allows us to have representation all the way through to our executive board around major decisions. There's definitely generational divides playing out around how people are choosing to lean into the future work. And what we've got to be careful of is that that doesn't play out into the decisions and big bets for the next 3, 5, 10 years that are being made by those that we're not actually placing those bets for. So I think there's an importance of employee voice. In a crisis, we go very top down. We all went top down. That was the right thing to do to give confidence around direction and messaging. But into this new phase of work, I think the opportunity is to redesign and co-design bottom up. At PwC, we did this ourselves, and I actually led a piece of work around what we called an employee jam, which was a week-long organizational discussion using a crowdsourcing digital platform that allowed us to bring all voices from across our organization. We had 4,500 people contributing over 25,000 different content and voting points, which allowed us to get sentiment on top of just quantitative data. And I think engaging your audience is absolutely critical. And my last point here, the last big bet for the future is going to be very much around finding ourselves in the decade of the Chief Mental Health Officer. We at PwC Australia have actually just appointed our first Chief Mental Health Officer. It's a huge step and really a recognition around the size of the challenge that we find ourselves within. The stats here around the $2.30, it's sort of roughly was $1 to $4 ROI. That was a 2018 piece of research. So I'd hazard a guess that actually the ROI is much higher now post the last 18 months and the rollout of different apps and devices and tools across enterprises and organizations. The big question here is we need to have better resources, training and skills for leaders and all levels of our organization to step into this space. If the future is hybrid, then our duty of care needs to be thought about differently than when we were just in an office. So we need to think about how we use data, how we experiment, how we use local teams, and not just a one-size-fits-all approach. So just to close on, to recap, I know that was a lot thrown at you in 10 minutes. I think we really need to be focusing and thinking about Horizon 3 as well as Horizon 1 and 2 opportunities. If I had 3 things to leave you with, it would be act now. So make decisions about what's right. Certainty and clarity are really important. No regrets, bets and moves. The future isn't a final destination. It's going to be fluid, but we need to recognize, and I think experimentations really play out into that space, and be bold. I think Horizon 3 type thinking requires business leaders to be bold and not be constrained by their starting points. So more radical change may be required for some organizations and industries. And I think that's a really good opportunity for people to go onto this journey, engage with their employees and see what the future holds. Sam, I'm going to leave it there. I look forward to the questions later on. Hope that was all right for now, and back to you.
Thank you, Lawrence. And I thought that was really, really impactful session. I also I wasn't sure if everyone could hear, but you'll be aware that I'm working from home today, which is also doubling up as a piano lesson environment. So apologies for those of you that heard grade 3 piano coming through the airwaves. I hope that's finished now and you can hear me loud and clear. So I suppose, Lawrence, what I found really useful for me was that you walk through the broad range of topics that are all relevant in this conversation. So it's not just one thing, it's both capability, the space we're going to work in, and also the experience that people get from work, which is more than just the one-dimensional, going to work and delivering an output. We all go there for the connectivity and the learnings that we get. So for me, that's a really fascinating topic. And then I think your closing message that we need to be bold in this and think differently about how we solve these problems makes it a topic that isn't going to go away, and I think we're going to get lots of further consideration on. And so with that, we might move on to our second presenter. So I'd like to introduce Kate Koch, who's the CFO at SEEK. Recently joined SEEK, I think it was in June this year, and she was attracted by SEEK's renowned culture, global footprint, and purpose to help people live a fulfilling and productive working life, and also to help organizations succeed. And prior to that, Kate was the CFO at RMIT University here in Melbourne, which, like the rest of the tertiary sector, has been severely impacted by COVID. And so I know from talking to Kate, she's got some really interesting, real, lived experiences around how organizations can deal with a huge impact to their business model. Prior to working here in Melbourne, Kate spent almost 14 years in the UK working in finance roles at both Tesco and also the global education and media company Pearson. Now, outside work, Kate has got many interests, although I do understand with recent lockdown, some of those interests have been restricted, and so a lot of her time at the moment is spent trying to keep her kids off tablets and devices, and then also when she's got spare time, jumping onto those devices and binge watching Netflix. So interesting lesson in do as you're told, but don't do as I do, which is similar to some of the parenting guidance that happens in my house. So with that, I might hand over to Kate. Thank you.
Thanks, Sam. It's really lovely to be here. Hi, everyone. Before I start, I'd like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Eastern Kulin Nation on whose land I'm sitting today, and have been sitting in pretty much the same spot for close to 230 days now of the last 18 months. So I'm very lucky. It is a nice place, and I'd like to acknowledge their elders past, present, and emerging. So I'm not an expert at all in this space, but I have worked with organisations like RMIT and SEEK, as Sam has said, that deeply think about this topic. So I think 5 is the number of the day. I've picked 5 emerging themes. It could have just as easily been 3 to 4, to be honest. They do overlap a little, but bear with me. I'll go through each of them, and you'll probably see how they overlap in the way I'll talk about them. So if we go to the first theme, which is automation, we're seeing new roles emerging and existing roles evolving as technology augments the skills required to work. So wherever there are repetitive tasks and judgment, of course, we'd expect automation would perform them at a higher quality, but with a lower cost. And so this has already and will unleash huge productivity gains to the economy. And there's barely a business or function that won't be impacted by this automation. We've seen examples. One that I particularly notice is in sales and marketing. They're becoming much more effective and efficient, through applications such as lead scoring, targeting, and message testing. There are 2 well-recognised studies on the impact of automation, and one predicts, probably quite negative, one predicts the eradication of a large number of roles, up to 40%, and the other predicts that the future is much more likely to be one of augmentation of labour and productivity gains within roles. And while it's really hard to predict exactly where we'll end up, we feel that it will likely be the augmentation route, which leads me to my second theme, which is polarisation of the workforce. So we predict this augmentation is going to lead to an accelerated hollowing out of the middle of the labour market. So that is that low and high skilled roles are on the rise, while jobs in the middle income range will increasingly decline. So this rise in automation actually creates enormous demand for highly skilled roles, highly paid roles. So they could be anything from creatives, developers, scientists, particularly data scientists, and makers of the machines which are automating our workforce. At the other end, we're seeing a proliferation of service-based roles, so particularly in caring and hospitality. These roles require some basic training, but the individual tasks are highly variable and therefore less prone to automation. Now, lifelong learning is increasingly a critical element of the massive shift we'll see, but I won't cover this in any detail today given the time constraints. The third theme is casualisation of the workforce, or I guess more specifically non-full-time work. And I think Lawrence referred to it as flexible work, all the same things. So low and high skill roles have traditionally had a higher proportion of flexible work arrangements. So it kind of follows that if they make up a greater proportion of the economy, then the level of flexible work in our economy will also rise. You can see from this graph that COVID has accelerated the trend we were already starting to see over the past 5 or so years. So the question remains, what levels will this normalise back to? Because we are starting to see it come back. But in our modelling, we think it's reasonable to expect that more than half of the Australian workforce will be in some form of flexible work arrangement in about 10 years' time. The fourth theme is remote workforce, which goes hand in hand with flexible work and was happening already, although has certainly accelerated through the pandemic. We do know that employees want it more than employers want it, and where the market's short in labour, for example, in engineering, data science, tech roles, there's likely to be more tolerance for remote work as companies compete for this talent. But we do see a distribution curve here with small numbers wanting to work 100% in the office at one end, small numbers at the other end wanting to work 100% at home, and the majority of workers wanting some sort of hybrid arrangement. And you can see on this slide examples from overseas and locally regarding policies around remote work. And the fact that Australia has been in lockdown over a longer period likely means it will take us longer to get back to a new normal. And the final theme is increased artificial intelligence. And the reason we're seeing this is threefold. I'm sure you're aware: advances in algorithms and techniques, more processing power, particularly including the cloud, and a massive increase in data at scale. So given the audience today, I thought we could look at how technology is amplifying the work accountants do. Firstly, accounting software needs to be trained. So accounts need to be set up, company-specific rules put in place, and accountants may have to make manual adjustments to transactions to ensure they flow to the proper accounts. But once the system has learned, accountants will spend much less time on this. Accountants are also now more explainers of information. So the accounting software generates the reports, it possibly even pulls out key stats and ratios. So the accountants will now focus on applying human judgment to what that means and what actions people in the organisation should take. So the finance team at SEEK love this kind of stuff. They use tools and to date have automated 20 processes across Asia Pacific. Everything from APIs between the ERP and reporting system, revenue recognition, cost allocation, automating the collections process. But I think it's really important to note that there's a human overlay here. So for example, in lockdowns last year, the team didn't aggressively chase collections via the AI tool. They overlaid compassion and thinking about the long-term relationship. So we estimate this has saved close to 3,000 hours of time already, or 120 days work effort. And the team tell me we've only just begun. So while they're all interesting trends around what we think will change in the world of work, what I personally think won't change is that organisations that put their people first will continue to be the most successful. So they're going to be able to attract, motivate, retain and develop great people who will in turn deliver distinctive value for our customers, which translates into long-term returns for shareholders and benefits for communities more broadly. So thanks, Sam. I'll hand back to you now.
Thank you, Kate, and thanks for that. I thought it was fascinating. I mean, as almost a veteran now of the finance industry, I suppose it's pleasing to hear that there's still future for us in this space, even though the work that the new graduates the superstars of tomorrow they'll be performing is very different from the work that we all perform, Kate. But I think you're totally right that the human overlay is critical. I mean, somebody needs to teach the bots what to do, and then make sure that they're not going off on their own path. But yeah, fascinating. And also, I thought the prediction that over half of the workforce will be in a flexible or casual working arrangement, I thought was interesting, and sort of makes me sort of think a bit about what that would mean to broader societal implications, which no, you didn't have time to cover today, but I know SEEK spend a lot of time thinking about as well. Maybe it's a question for the Q&A. And so with that, we'll move on to our third speaker. So Rich Walker, who I mentioned earlier, is the General Manager of Finance at Coles. He's been with Coles since 2011, or basically a decade with the company, and has worked across a range of roles whilst being at Coles. He's currently the store operations, supply chain and group transformation support. And so with that role, he gets a great insight into most aspects of their business which have been most impacted by the recent pandemic. And clearly Coles needs no introduction, but over the last few years has had the spin-off from Wesfarmers with the IPO, and also, you know, been along with Woolies, has been absolutely on the forefront of dealing with shortages in toilet paper, supply chain challenges, and also managing multiple sort of tier 1 and tier 2 hotspots around the community. So I know Coles has been playing a huge role in helping all of us get through the last 18 months. In his spare time outside of work, outside his time at work with Coles, Rich he spends his time with his 2 daughters, aged 10 and 5, and I know he does try and keep fit. And I also understand, Rich, that you are either in the middle of or about to start a renovation, so that also sounds like it's another stressful thing to add to your spare time. So with that, Rich, I'll hand over to you, and looking forward to your presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Sam, and thanks for the invite this afternoon. I should confess to Lawrence, I'm a lifelong Evertonian, which could curtail the video quite quickly. So, I mean, I guess what to remind in terms of COVID is a lot has happened since those first 4 cases back on the 26th of Jan last year. And every organisation's COVID context is different. Every individual's context is different, and every family's context is different. So for the next few minutes, I'll share some of the story from Coles and what we've experienced. And as a brief reminder, you know, what is Coles? It's a $38 billion organisation, ASX 20, over 100,000 team members, and as you quite rightly say, Sam, at the forefront of COVID. And on the slide here, just a few points to help explain the context of Coles through that journey. Starting, not surprisingly, with that change in consumer behaviour, which on many levels started with the restrictions on toilet paper at the start of March last year, to Coles turning off its online operation, but 2 weeks later, which was, for an organisation of our size, incredible. So then 2 weeks after that, asking customers to pack their own bags at the registers. So the analogy of trying to turn the oil tanker into a speedboat was definitely appropriate in terms of what we experienced. Whilst we moved through that journey, then I guess not surprisingly, an enormous focus for the business on both team member and customer safety, and it's with pride today I wear the Coles team member shirt and think of those 100,000 team members out in shops, and most notably in Victoria last year, very much at the front line and the forefront of the pandemic as it pushed through Vic, and clearly now in New South Wales in a very material way. And an amazing time for finance to shine and participate in the management of COVID through that period. And again, I'll talk more about that on my next slide in a second. And then we see at the bottom of the slide here, team member engagement and initiatives. At a very practical level, beyond the 100,000 team members we have in shops, then, as a Melbourne-based organisation, then, ordinarily that was 4,000 team members in a support centre in Melbourne that in 1 week all worked together and were very comfortable working together. The next week we were working from home and had to adapt incredibly quickly to that changing requirement for the entire team, which again, I think the word last year of the moment was unprecedented, and it absolutely was that. And if we just then turn our eye to the pictures on the screen, 2 fascinating pieces of innovation that came through the adversity of COVID, and one of which I'm very proud to have sponsored and supported. On the middle there, you see a picture of a register. And that was the creation and implementation of bag packing benches for customers, which again came out of COVID. We'd never have done that before at the pace that we did. Another one was the reinvention of our online operation, which again, we turned off momentarily for a small period, apart from a small minority of people. And then last but not least on that slide, trying to manage a $1 billion automation program up in Queensland and New South Wales from Melbourne. Incredibly challenging. So let's flick over to the next slide. So, what did that mean for finance? And very much many of the points that Kate and Lawrence raised resonate with me and the conversations we've had in the team. First and foremost, that data, insight, and analytics very much thrust to the forefront of lots of conversations. And in the first instance, standing up the advanced analytics group to work out how many people you could have safely in a store, all came about within the first 2 weeks of COVID and came on the back of strong analytical capability within the group. The variable demand components, how do we understand the shift in customer behavior from people shopping in big shopping centres to then shopping locally to shopping online to only shopping once a week instead of twice? That very stable 15 million transactions we were used to all of a sudden turned upside down in a very material way. The point around mental health, very much at the forefront of the team. And we partner with an organisation called the Resilience Project, who have built a fabulous program around which they call GEM, gratitude, empathy, and mindfulness, which again we've pushed across the entire organisation, and we see that across elite sporting clubs, in schools, and again something that we are continuously thinking about as a team, given again to the point I made earlier on that people's contexts are very different. A very different business continuity model, and beyond the traditional when you have a problem into how do you manage relationships with state and federal or government. And then last but not least, through all of this, how do people build careers? How do you move around the organization? And very much a focus on increased transparency and communication of career management processes within Coles. How do you onboard new team members in a way that for many, they will not have met their team physically, and ensure that they enjoy their journey and start with the organisation? Again, very practical challenges that we've had to face into, and would love to take questions on, because I'm conscious my 6 minutes is up already. So
well done, Rich, well done. I always like it when the presenters stick to time. I'd like to give Lawrence some feedback afterwards. So look, that was really fascinating. I think it's interesting to me that you've got consistent themes between the different speakers, but also the way, Rich, you mentioned that it was the energy that you used to mention how COVID has given finance a real opportunity to play an absolutely meaningful role in solving critically important problems, both for Coles and for society. And it's not always you hear that in the same context as as the problems that we deal with day to day. I think also the opportunity that Coles has had to really accelerate its digital and automation program. Clearly when you've got these kind of issues, it forces change to happen really rapidly. And so, fascinating insight there. And so with that, we might move on to the Q&A. As I mentioned earlier, there's an opportunity to drop questions into the text box. If you haven't done so already, then please do go ahead. And if there's a specific person you'd like to allocate that question to, then make that clear as well. So we might kick off with a relatively easy one. Kate, might just go to you first, if that's okay. So really keen to get your perspectives, Kate, on, if you knew then what you know now, what would you have done differently? And what are the sort of really 2 or 3 really fascinating things that have really surprised you over the last sort of 18 months as you've worked through the impact of COVID?
Yeah, I think I know the one thing that we wouldn't have done differently, which is put the safety of people first. And look, it sounds like Rich and Coles and PwC have done that as well. But looking after prioritising safety and wellbeing of your employees, I think is super critical. In terms of in what you would have done differently, then I guess preparing for this remote world of work, right? And one thing I'm passionate about is data and process and governance and things like that. And actually having the data at your fingertips when you're making these really critical decisions, you always could have done more in this area, but it would have been great sometimes to have it so that you're not wondering if the data is correct. You're actually just kind of making decisions now. That would probably be my one point. And look, that's what every organisation's leaning into, but COVID's kind of made it more real. The thing that I found funny starting in my new role, that many of the key milestones of my new role as CFO, my first CFO of an ASX listed company, has been in my UGG boots, which I'm not sure that would have ever happened before now. So that really is an amusing side of COVID, I guess, and definitely in winter, not a bad thing.
No, agreed. And Rich, keen for your perspectives as well on that same question.
Look, I tend to agree with the points that Kate made, and that the build would be, better familiarity with all of the different online tools that are available, which, as times move forward, you become increasingly effective. I attended a great session last week, which, again, 12, 18 months ago would not have been the quality it was if we'd not had the experience of COVID and the requirement to get good in some of those online tools.
Yeah, thank you. We just had a question come through, which is an interesting one, I think, around what's everyone's view on the option of a 4-day week, which has been trialled in different countries in the Northern Hemisphere. Obviously, there's different perspectives on that. So maybe, Lawrence, I'll start with you, get your thoughts, and then would be keen on Rich and Kate as well.
Yeah, and then this is something that's been actually out for a while. It's obviously been accelerated through the last 18 months. There's a number of countries actually doing trials, and funny enough, the ACT government is currently doing a parliamentary inquiry into a 4-day week. So it's a topic that we're going to hear a lot more of. It's not going to go away. I don't think that you're going to find universal answers to this. I think this, I kind of made the point before around hyper-localization into teams, and being, one-size-fits-all models around organizations is going to be really difficult to make work. You're going to have unintended consequences into one part for another, but you're definitely starting to see a lot of organizations trialing and experimenting. And I use the word experiments in sort of my points earlier on. I think we're going to move into the year of the experiment very much here, Sam. My local team here, we work a 9-day fortnight because it works for us, and we've been trialing that for the last 16 months or so. I know other teams that have been moving to 4-day weeks, 9-day fortnights, different flexibility leaves. There's been different sort of benefits that have been used around annual leave days and how to take time off. I think there's going to be a lot more coming into this, but I'm all for the conversation and for the blowing apart of what's been known as the traditional kind of, 9 to 5, Monday to Friday model.
Yeah. I mean, Kate, you mentioned obviously in your presentation around the flexible and casualization, the sort of trend. I mean, is that something that you sort of consider alongside the 4-day week, or was it?
Yeah, look, it's interesting because I think most organisations these days are running 7 days a week, or particularly Coles. I know SEEK is, the employment platform's up all the time, right? So how people want to work around that, I mean, I think it's just an extension of flexible working and what people want to do for themselves and what works for the company. So, we've got some initiatives where, certain days where we try not to email people, or we don't have set meetings, so people have got the flexibility to either take time off or do deep thinking work without being bothered or interrupted. But you're trialing lots of different things around that, particularly as we're finding the Zoom fatigue or the screen fatigue is incredibly high at the moment, and how to give our workforce a break. So we're trying lots of different things. I'm not sure we've nailed it, but we're definitely open to new things. But watching what happens with that parliamentary inquiry with interest.
Thank you, Kate. And then Rich, I'm not sure if you had a perspective on that question, but also another question has come through around the sort of the digitization of the way we work. And you mentioned things have changed over the last 18 months. And so keen to understand how Coles is helping to support team members to be able to influence and build connections across the team when most interactions are online.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's something now that we encourage all leaders and individuals to work at, and I think spend more time thinking about connection than we did do previously, when it was easy with everyone physically, typically in the workplace. And from a skills point of view, again, to Lawrence's commentary earlier on, then we're investing in training around tools like Power BI. That we're doing some good work with PwC. We're focusing on changing that skill mix within the team, which I think is very much around upskilling existing team members for skills for the future, which I think, say, from a thematic perspective, is absolutely aligned to the points that Lawrence made. We've got a long way to go, but it's nice that we started the journey, and the intent is strong.
Yeah, thank you. And then Lawrence, I wasn't sure if you had anything to add on that particular question as well.
Only when I back up around the whole skilling piece. In our recent CEO survey, I did note, and it was a concerning stat, because I pointed out before that something like 76% of people want new skills, but only 16% of Australian CEOs saw it as a priority in terms of skilling and reskilling. Now, that doesn't mean it's not important, but if it's not a priority and we've got this huge war for talent, we've got to be looking at skilling, reskilling, and upskilling very differently. And I think that investment in both, as I said before, technical and human skills, the skills gap that we've spoken a lot about is real, but we've had a tendency to lean very much into the technical side of that. I think the skills of the future around resilience, complex problem solving, creativity, intuitive thinking, all of the softer human skills, that's really where there's a huge boost to be gained from. And I think there's a lot of focus needed there.
Yeah, thank you. And then Rich, just that sort of, your response triggered a thought as well for me around Coles is as we all are aware, is an essential, part of an essential industry. So as I understand it, more of your team could be on site than potentially others. And so how have you managed that sort of tension between the desire to be physically there and present and able to sort of work in, let's call it the old ways of working, versus really grasping new virtual and digital techniques?
No, great question. And I think it's like building new muscle. It takes time, and the ways of working and trust between finance and the operational teams we support, again, takes a little while to build. But I think we found a really happy balance now, whereby the finance group, the CFO group more broadly, have really focused in on those deep relationships with their stakeholders, and more so than perhaps when you're physically together, when it's a little easier. But equally, a real understanding from the operational teams around the practicalities of remote working and the fact that you cannot be in the office all of the time. So we found a real nice balance. And typically we see groups of people go in to, work through projects, to brainstorm and what have you, and then go home to work specifically on individual pieces of work. So I think we've got a good balance, but continuously looking at it to make sure that it's fit for purpose.
Yeah, thank you. And then Kate, really interested in your own experiences, given that you've had to start, as you mentioned, you've started a new role, a pretty challenging new role right in the middle of the pandemic. So I presume there's team members that you work with that you've never physically met. So I'm just really keen for how you've managed to build those relationships quickly. And then to the extent you can share, how you will work through the challenges that come with assessing their performance of team members when you also don't have that face-to-face interaction with them.
So I think the one thing I've had to just relax into and stop stressing about is it's going to take longer than it would if you're in the office. I went through, maybe 4 or 5 weeks in, I went through a really frustrated period about not being in the office. And I must admit, my first day of work, I sat at the same desk, opened a different laptop, talked to different people, and it kind of didn't feel like I'd started a new job almost. It felt like I was almost interviewing for my job still. So we had a little gap there in lockdown, and I went into the office in a mask. And I know all my operations colleagues who run the buildings really well, not so much my team, but I just kind of went around and introduced myself to anybody who was there, and just got to the office just to. And then as that happened, you know, over a period of about 2 weeks, a few people would come in and I'd meet them. But realistically, I've probably met 36 people. That's it. So now what I'm finding is you have to be really purposeful to get to know people. So scheduling time, I tend to turn up really early to meetings, and just if someone turns up early, I have a chat to them. Now, the problem is, though, with all these tools that ping you the minute your meeting starts, you'll find that most people, at least at SEEK anyway, or tech companies, they join on the dot of the hour. So that strategy hasn't been as successful for me. And even this week, like I'm having these, you've got to have like a marketing line, right? So cuppa with Kate. So I just have a cup of tea virtually with my people in my team, and we have a chat. Not about work, just about life, making sure they're coping. We try and think of, you know, good things we're going to take out of this period, what we're going to look back on and, you know, think about fondly, things like that. So just things to get people talking. And actually my leadership team reaching out to everybody at least once every couple of weeks and checking in and making sure they're okay, because there are people struggling at the moment.
Yeah. Sam, if I could add one thing onto that, because I think when we talk about performance in a remote work, I think the thing that we've got to be careful about is not just applying the same rules and tendencies that we were used to working within, and that's both around formal performance, but also how we check in, how we work into a hybrid world. It's just not going to work. So we need to redesign, and we actually with purpose need to rethink how we manage performance, how we check in with people, the type of work that needs to be done, how we blend synchronous and asynchronous work that was mentioned before. We need to rethink our models around this, because at the moment we're still applying old world models or pre-pandemic models of work and performance and criteria and timings into a hybrid remote work, and that's just not gonna land.
Have you got any suggestions on what to fix, Lawrence? Then I think there'll be people on the session that we're keen to hear it, or maybe it's a whole topic for another day. But yeah, I think it's a really fascinating one. And then as we're talking, Lawrence, the questions just come through. I think your comment that 2022 could be the year of the Great Resignation, I think that's made an impact. Probably alarmed a few people as well. So if there's one or two really important things that you think organisations can do now to help retain employees, what would they be?
Well, I think I focused a little bit on EVP, right? The changing EVP earlier. I think clarity of message and a confidence into the future and a redefinition. I think focusing on the past or on old world ways of working, right? So I think those that are focusing on, days in the office and just trying to get back to the way things were versus setting a new exciting vision that people can adapt towards. People want the confidence that they're being heard and the confidence that the future matches their needs as an employee. If that pendulum really has swung, you have to accept that and you have to meet some of that. So I think the EVP challenge is a real one, and it really isn't just all down to REM. So I think it's looking at the non-remuneration side around investment in skills as a really key example, and being able to engage differently. I think if we can start to engage, and if organizations can engage their employee base early, at least it gives the right signs, but you've got to do something on the back of that engagement. If you're going to ask, you have to be prepared to act, right? So you need to be able to have those actions and the commitments to be able to start to trial and do some things differently. And that's going to be hard for a lot of senior leaders who are used to working a certain way. And what worked for them is what, we just want to get back to the office and back to the way things were. But if things have changed fundamentally, that could be a really flawed argument.
Yeah, I think most of us are hoping we don't go back to having to commute every day. But I'm sure there's other changes that we'll all realise have actually changed for the better. So, Kate, one of the comments that you made has also resonated a lot with the audience around the societal impacts that will come from that really heavy shift towards flexible working and sort of casual working arrangements. And so, just keen for any other perspectives that you and the SEEK team have around those broader societal impacts. And then I suppose it'd be interesting for me from a finance perspective around, do we see a situation where, you might have a very capable finance team member who works for both SEEK and Coles, for example, or PwC and SEEK, on a permanent, continuous basis.
Yeah, well, look, we've got a business that does that called Sidekicker, right? You can work for anybody through that. And we do have people that work for us using that platform, right? Who are, in the past, I think people thought those platforms were more for tech, more applied skills. But actually what we're finding is that highly skilled people are now wanting to run their lives differently. And it isn't one demographic or one generation. I like Lawrence's point about 5 generations in the workforce and accommodating them all. That's a really good way. And I'd almost be happy to share people with best in class other organisations and apply learnings from different industries into our organisation. So, Rich, maybe you and I need to talk after this. I don't know.
I presume, Rich, depending on the role that your team members have got, you already have quite a few people in the Coles workforce who do dial up and dial down the amount of hours that they work for Coles during any given week or month.
Yeah, for sure. And we also jump into stores a couple of times a year just to try our hand in the different departments, which I am utterly terrible with when I do, but I give it a red hot go. But no, I think to Kate's point, it's something that is a current conversation around, how do we cater for the centennial workforce that will have 2 or 3 jobs, and what does that look like in the context of Coles and the finance community is again something we've not yet solved for, but is a question that we need to.
Yeah, I'm conscious of time, so we might wrap up with one question, which I'll ask each of you to provide perspectives on. So, given most of the people on this call are from the finance community, there's been a few questions in and around the topic around, is there a more permanent future for outsourced and virtual CFO capabilities, given the shortage of, effectively good quality supply in this space? Do organisations need to shift the way they're thinking and use those types of service providers more frequently? So maybe Rich, we'll start with you, then hand over to Kate on that one.
Ooh, well, great question. So my initial thought would be I'm not sure. In so much as as a career retailer, then I think much of my effectiveness comes from being in a very relatable industry, something I can go and touch and feel. Which, if that just existed in a virtual environment, then whilst I think I could ask some good questions, I'm not sure I'm convinced I will be effective or as effective as I am in the way that we can integrate physical at the moment. But a really interesting one I'd have to go away and think about.
Yeah, I think I'm going to play the same card as Rich. I actually think a really important part of any organisation's culture is in-person interactions, and I liked Lawrence's point about earning the commute, and I think people will come in for experiencing the culture, having those good experiences, brainstorming. So there might be elements of the CFO role that can be outsourced, and thinking can be done by people much smarter than me. But I do agree that humans crave physical interaction. So I can't see it being, I can't see myself being 100% remote.
I can see, Lawrence, you're nodding away in the background. Anything else you'd like to?
Oh no, I was nodding very much on that sort of human interaction and physical. The only thing I would add in is, and I didn't talk about it before, but I wonder if we are going to see more of a borderless culture if we start to think about resource and people working remote. There are 3 billion people living in a 3-hour time zone between Sydney and Perth. So is this the opportunity for us to start thinking a bit broader about the topic around skills and availability of talent?
Paul, thank you. Now, I am conscious of time, so we will have to wrap it up there. I think it's been a fascinating session. I think we've covered a huge range of topics, from skills gaps and capability development to what it is that we all really crave in terms of the work environment, and I think that point around earning the commute is important. What is it that's going to get us out of our studies and back in working in teams, wherever that might be, physically working in teams. And so thank you all for attending this session. Just a couple of closing points from me. So you'll all have the chance to provide feedback. Every participant, every audience member have the chance to provide feedback on this session. So we really do appreciate your thoughts and your comments on that. So if you can please submit that form when it comes through, and we will also share the recording of today's session with everyone, and there'll also be access to those slides as well if that's of interest. And last but not least, I'd like to thank every member of the G100 working group and all the participants today. So obviously with Rich, Kate and Lawrence, thank you all. And I think that is everything I've got to do. So thank you all. Enjoy the rest of your week and stay safe. Thanks.